Hello, the MLK Day Celebration Committee is excited to welcome you to a discussion of the new documentary, John Lewis, Good Trouble, and the legacy of the courageous activist and legislator. I'm Jack Curtis. I'm a member of the committee. As some of you may know, Congressman Lewis, who is 80 years old, is currently battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I'm sure we all wish him well. Lewis, who has remained in the DC area for his treatment, has stated, "I have been in some kind of fight for freedom, equality, basic human rights for nearly my entire life. I've never faced a fight quite like the one I have now." And that's what we'll be discussing tonight. His hard-fought battles and today's heated battles for equity and justice. I'd like to introduce Nika Elugardo, State House Representative for the 15th Suffolk District, and Adrian Walker, veteran Boston Globe Metro columnist. I feel it's not often that we get to see a biographical film about an icon who's still alive. And that's what makes John Lewis, Good Trouble, so special. So to move on, watching the film, Nika and Adrian, did you enjoy getting to know Lewis better?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was a very powerful movie for me to watch. And yeah, it was very moving to get such an intimate look at the congressman and the struggles he's pursued throughout his life and career.
I would agree that intimacy is the word. You felt like you were sharing a view into his heart and into his mind, and just watching him grow as a man from a young man throughout his congressional years. It was a very powerful and inspiring arc that you feel like, okay, it's going to keep on going. He's passing the baton to so many people.
That's right.
Right. Did you see or learn anything new or surprising about John Lewis or about the civil rights movement, and that he's a good dancer? No.
He loves to dance. I actually already knew that because I've seen him dance. But
Wow.
yeah, he was at Stepping Out last year, and he started dancing with Congresswoman Presley. But
Nice.
I learned a lot I didn't know about his congressional career. You know, a lot of what you hear about him relates to his civil rights activism in the '60s, rightly so. But it told me a lot of things I didn't know really about his time in Washington.
Yeah, he's kept battling throughout. So you met John Lewis in 2015 at the Kennedy Institute Symposium marking the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. What's your recollection of him, and the portrait you saw in the film, was that the John Lewis you remember?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, I got to interview him for an hour. It was just the two of us on stage there at the Kennedy Institute. And it was one of the most inspiring experiences of my entire career, I have to say. In fact, you know, I've done thousands of interviews, and the only time I can ever really remember getting choked up is when I was interviewing John Lewis, and we're talking about that day, Bloody Sunday, in Selma in 1965. And I asked him, "How did you get off the bridge?" And he said, "I don't know. I've never remembered." Right. Because, you know, he had been knocked unconscious. And that was just such an emotional moment for me. So yeah, that interview was huge. And the movie did absolutely match up with the John Lewis that I've had the honor of meeting a couple of times.
Yeah. I thought it was startling. There were at least 2 or 3 images where you shot from above and you see that he's got bandages on his head.
Yes. And of course, there's a movement now. There's a petition to rename the Edmund Pettus Bridge for John Lewis, and I hope it happens. It really should.
Wow, that would be cool. That would be cool. So was there a moment in the film or something that Lewis said that you feel was emblematic of John Lewis as an activist and as a legislator?
I thought it was very powerful when he said, first, we had to change. You guys understand why? Yes. And we protested because we had changed. And I think that's a powerful message for all of us today. And I think it's dangerous when we protest expecting the change to come from outside of ourselves. And it was like he was saying, we had made up our mind, we had done what needed to be done. And I think he even said, we were giving others the opportunity to do the same. But as far as we were concerned, it was a done deal, essentially. And I found that like a foothold that I could step onto myself. I really resonated with that way of seeing the world as I look out. You know, I am changing. My people are changing. We're elevating our own thinking. We're understanding our complicitness in injustice. And we are changing and we're stepping out into justice. And we're calling everyone to do the same. That feels like a powerful and inspiring way to proceed in dark times.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Nika, Ayanna Pressley stated that John Lewis gave us the blueprint to organize, mobilize, and legislate. So how does that resonate for you?
Yeah, I've heard Congresswoman Pressley say that before, and it never gets old. It inspires me every single time. And at the same time, it's like step one, those three things, because even if we get to the point of change legislation, it's just the beginning. We need a culture shift. We need a mental shift, a revolution of the mind, so to speak. In Massachusetts, in our country, we have to think about people differently. We have to think about economies differently. We have to think about the climate and the planet differently. And especially we have to think about how we relate to each other differently and invest in each other and get a return on that investment. And legislation can facilitate that, but it really is it's a launch pad. And so people need to be ready to change. And I think that's the hardest part.
Adrian, in your column on June 18th, titled "What We Celebrate This Juneteenth," you said something similar to what Nika's saying now. You wrote that the protests following the killing of George Floyd charged us to challenge and to rethink what it means to be fair and everyone's role in that struggle. You concluded we have to be active participants in building something more just. So for both of you, what are your hopes for these current demands for rethinking and for reform, forming many facets of American society and culture?
Well, I'm inspired by the idea that things that we've long taken for granted, like the authority of the police, for example, are on the table and are things that are now up for debate and open to reconsideration. I think we don't know specifically yet what's going to change. I don't think anybody can give you a list of the next 5 things that are going to change, but there is this palpable sense that is so broadly shared that there is so much that we need to re-examine, particularly in terms of race relations. And I think that in itself makes this an inspiring moment.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with Adrian that it's impossible to see when you're in the middle of it. And, we can look back on the footage. There was even a moment where John Lewis in the film said, "I haven't seen this footage." And you got the impression that it was affecting him in a different way than being present in those times. And for me, part of that is because we can see so much happening that they probably couldn't see. And we could see minds shifting because we know that today I can go sit at a bar and order dessert at any deli or cafe. And if anybody tries to stop me, not only will the police come, but probably, most of the people in the restaurant in this part of the country are going to protest, if they say the kind of overt racist things that were being said there. And that gives me hope, growing up with a real emphasis as a child on the negativity around me and the negative mindsets that people had. And really understanding there's such a high capacity for people to change in a generation. One of the things that moved me most about the movie, and this has happened to me many times whenever I learn or read or watch history, particularly history of dismantling structural racism, many of those people, John Lewis included, are still alive. Some of the people calling him the N-word and others and banging them on the head and trying to kill him and dragging them down the street are still alive. And so this isn't so far back in history, this is our present time. And look how far we've come. And so how far we have to go doesn't look as daunting. Maybe people can change their minds in my lifetime about whether or not every child really deserves equal education. Every family really deserves good housing. Every worker really deserves a livable wage. And it goes on from there.
Yeah.
You know, one of the inspiring things about Lewis's career to me is that he always makes a point that, you know, the work is never finished and that this is a lifetime project. You know, he says in the movie, and I've heard him say this elsewhere too, you know, he was arrested 40 times in the 60s. He's also been arrested 5 times.
Yes.
He's been in Congress, which he's proud of, you know, and he'll probably be arrested again, he says.
And,
yeah, he's expecting it to continue.
He had that sit-in on the floor of the
Yes,
House of
that's right.
Representatives.
That's right. So, you know, that the work is never done, you know. This is an ongoing project and it always will be.
So I'm getting a sense of what he means for you personally. What his struggles and triumphs, what do they mean to you? I have a sense somewhat of what that means, what his life means to you personally. Do you feel there's this, do you feel that people across the country will respond to the challenge you talked about with open minds and commitment?
I think leadership is more important than I ever realized, especially political leadership. I grew up with people that are active in the community. So I've always understood that level of interpersonal leadership, like on your block, and how important it was for me to have people in my neighborhood and community that were lifting me up. But having Barack Obama and then Trump back to back, and then having the COVID epidemic happen during Trump, where you have this almost head-to-head test of sort of science and well-being against sort of culture and rhetoric. And you see the power of the positive culture and rhetoric, especially in Obama's early years. And then you see the power of the negative culture and rhetoric, even in the face of literal death. And people discount not only the well-being of others, but their own well-being when they're inspired, even in a negative way. And so I think we really need, at the highest levels of leadership, and not just in the president and his vice president choice and the cabinet members and the congresses and the state houses and the city halls and town meetings across the country. We need everyday people to be extraordinary. And I think that is possible. So many people are stepping up to the extraordinary times by being their most extraordinary selves. And we have to continue to give access to those people to the highest levels of power. And I think if we do that, the country will move to an open place, not without a struggle, not without revolution, at least a revolution of the mind. And I know we're not ready for it because you're never ready for a revolution, or you wouldn't call it a revolution, you call it a transition. But I do think that we long for a radical shift in how we think and how we feel and experience this country. And now that has creeped into so many parts of society that haven't considered themselves to be suffering in the past. You know, middle-class white societies are experiencing collective suffering. So I have a lot of hope, but I think it will get worse before it gets better.
You know, there's a thought that I've had about Lewis's goals are to save democracy, save America, save the soul of America. And now more about deeper, combating entrenched prejudice and racism, systems, policy, structure, rather than this ideal that's embodied, let's say, in the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, but it's always been about battling entrenched systems. I mean, the battles of the 60s were very much fighting systemic racism and deeply entrenched systems that had been entrenched since going back to Reconstruction and before. So I don't think that aspect of it is new. I think the solutions will be found in different places. I mean, I think there's less faith now, frankly, that voting is what's going to save us. I'm not necessarily sure I say that. I'm not necessarily sure I share that is what I mean. But, I don't know if the solutions will be the same as the ones that were fought for in the 60s. But I don't think the battles are all that different.
Okay.
I would say, just on the voting point, one of the things I've been trying to figure out how to communicate lately is that voting needs to be a step to engagement, and engagement to running. And we have to have everyday kids growing up thinking what they're going to run for. Because voting only matters if people in your community that you trust and understand what your needs and your dreams and your potential is. If those people are running, then voting matters. And if they're not, it's still just kind of a dream. And so I think one of the new solutions is that very atypical politicians, and I'm not talking about like myself, I'm talking about people who are still living like I lived when I grew up, who haven't had the opportunity for huge amounts of education or travel or jobs, really understand how to lead politically. And I think at the local level, especially, that's going to be a powerful window into change.
Yeah, but I will also, that's all true, but I would also say voting is only important if people do it.
Yeah.
When I talk
all
to
those people, they got registered.
I said, why don't more people vote?
Yes.
You want a revolution? How about doubling the number of people who go to the polls, which at this point isn't that high a bar?
They got 70% of the people registered. And I made a little note when I was watching that. How many of them were voting a few years after that and are voting now?
Right. Well, how many people voted in 2008 who didn't vote in 2016?
Right.
I mean, that's how we got Trump.
Well,
right.
So we know that Lewis helped pass the Voting Rights Act, and I think one of the facts that came up in the film was registration in Mississippi grew by 800%.
From a very low point.
But I want to talk, I'm glad we're talking about this, because in the film we see Lewis and President Obama and former US Attorney General Eric Holder saying that today democracy is under attack by recent acts to suppress people's, especially minorities, ability to vote. So what does this situation say to you? I'm thinking are you thinking, well, here's the same old fight continues and we have to be eternally vigilant? That they're going to, even with the progress made in the 60s, there's still a way to, I don't know, take an end run and upset the process.
Well, absolutely, because Southern states in particular have never stopped fighting the battle they lost in the 60s to disenfranchise Black people.
You read my mind.
Huh?
You read my mind.
That's what's going on in Georgia. That's what's going on in Kentucky, where they're trying to get rid of the polling places in all the Black neighborhoods in Louisville. That's what's going on in Alabama, where they're trying to get rid of all the polling places in the Black cities and towns. This goes back to what I said before about how many of these battles are only, superficially transformed. A lot of them are the same fights they were 50, 60 years ago.
And I would say that the Civil War, we never really put that thing to bed.
No.
You go to other countries and somebody loses a war, you don't have monuments celebrating the loss that are almost religiously revered for 102 years after that almost. And the mindsets have not been challenged. There hasn't been any re-education in our school systems. In fact, our education has reinforced the view of the Confederacy, even the education as far north as Massachusetts and Maine. And so, we have to face that war and finish it.
I went to a school named for Robert E. Lee.
Right. I know people who are, like I said, I'm going to be 47 this month. I know people who are much younger than me who went to schools named after Robert E. Lee. Actually, my maiden name comes from Robert E. Lee's family, as it happens. But we haven't faced that stuff. And I think a lot of people don't even process the fact that John Lewis is the same John Lewis that was getting dragged through the streets, and that the people dragging him through the streets are some of the same people that are John Lewis's age walking around whatever part of the country right now. And some of them have changed their mindsets, and some of their children haven't.
And some of their grandchildren are running for Congress.
Right, with the same rhetoric, but cleaned up a little bit.
Right.
I don't know if you've seen, I think that people are definitely picking up all kinds of messages. They're also looking to see how to see things differently. All the books and the Globe's bestseller paperback nonfiction are, the last 2 weeks, completely about the African-American experience, about racism, about, there's the color of law. The new Jim Crow is back on the bestseller list.
Yep.
So maybe it tells us a lot about the region we're in, but every book is about, I'll say, the current crisis, relates to the current crisis, which I find promising. Would like you to talk about your feelings about how Lewis's words and actions live on for today. And then a corollary to that, do you think his legacy is relevant to the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think that, the Black Lives Matter movement, the fact that we have to have this phrase, I can feel indignant about it at times. Like, I don't want to tell somebody that my life matters, my people's life matters. But what John Lewis's legacy reminds us is that, controlling the message matters. And we can continue his fight with new language, and we'll never get it right, but we will see significant change. And I think he embodies that. I was surprised when he said, I didn't know that, and I don't even know if I understood this right, but he said, I didn't say Black power because I thought everybody had power. And that reminded me of like All Lives Matter versus like Black Lives Matter kind of a situation. But it also reminded me that we needed all of that. We needed all of that to take a leap forward, even if we took a leap backwards afterwards. And what does the Black Lives Matter have to offer the world in terms of engaging brown people, white people in our struggle and in our victory? And I think that what we're seeing in 2020 is a new and elevated entry, I guess, of everybody into what it means for Black lives to matter, even what you said about the books. And so instead of having to reject this idea of Black power, to reject this idea of Black Lives Matter, for all lives matter, we're actually embracing Black Lives Matter as white people, embracing Black Lives Matter as brown people. We're taking on that struggle in and of itself, but also in a representational way of all injustice, of LGBTQ injustice, of religious injustice and tyranny, of disability injustice. And I think that is both it's chaotic and volatile, and it's also beautiful and full of potential and possibility that I don't think did exist in the civil rights movement of the 60s, because it was a little more black and white. There was like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. That's how history tells the story. But the intersectional reality of people today is something that we celebrate, and the nuances and the complexity and the way that we all are interconnected. I think young people in particular are rising up with that expectation of being seen and heard and the complexity of who they are. And so I think Black Lives Matter is like a rainbow within itself. And I think that John Lewis gave us a stepping stone for that, but I think we can go to the next level.
You know, when I think about John Lewis' legacy, and I don't want to talk about him in the past tense, but
Right.
you know, he's one of the living examples of one of the greatest grassroots movements this country has ever seen. And yes, it's different now, but when we see people take to the streets, as we have over the past couple of months, we're seeing a lot of the legacy of the civil rights movement. It has expanded, and that is a great thing. But you know, the legacy is that, you know, it taught us that ordinary people can achieve great things. Ordinary people can claim power and use it to change the society. And that is a lesson that has endured.
Yeah.
There's a moment in the film when it's sort of shot from behind him, and you don't know who he's speaking to, but it could be to today's protesters, because he says, if you see something that's not right, if you see something that's not fair, use your voice, stand up. And it seems like it could just be directed to the people who were trying to move forward right now.
Well, wasn't it cool how he said that when he was young and when he was middle-aged, and as an older man, he keeps saying it, and it keeps having that enduring meaning.
Oh, but that sends me right back to the speech at the 63 march, because he said, "America, wake up. We will not wait." You know, he was 22 years old then or something. So I want to talk a little bit more about the similarities and differences between what the Globe this past Sunday called the new civil rights era and the civil rights era of the 60s. Can you talk a bit more about that? The similarities and differences between then and now.
Well, I mean, the similarity, unfortunately, is that some of the battles are the same. But the difference, as Representative Elugardo points out, is that what you're seeing today is so much broader. The issues are broader, and so are the people who are involved. You know, I've been struck watching the demonstrations of the last few weeks at how many white people are involved. You didn't see that in the 60s in the way you're seeing it now. And there are so many more issues on the table, issues of gender and issues of, you know, LGBTQ and all kinds of other things. It isn't, as you say, black and white in the way that it was 50 years ago.
Yeah, everyone keeps talking about the current moment. The current moment is this different? Is it really going to happen this time around? But yeah, the battles and the pathways are open, I think.
When I was 17, I did my first sort of environmental action because we moved a lot as a kid, and we had just moved to this place that was next to some kind of plastics plant, and there was this toxic smell coming out. So I tried to walk around and get a petition, and I couldn't get anyone I knew to even sign it. It was the first time we lived in public housing. We had just been accustomed to getting evicted all the time. And then we got public housing when my parents had some troubles. And, you know, one of those structural issues is that it was easier to get public housing as a single mom than it was for a Black couple. And I looked out, when was it? Maybe October, the first climate strike that the kids did in Boston. And some kids in my district were some of the organizers. And so I went to go see them behind stage. And I looked out at 1,000+ people, and I cried. And they were so upset because they had fallen short of their goals, particularly around diversity. And my eyes full of tears, I told them, when I was 17, when I talked about prison abolition, using different words, when I talked about environmental justice, I was alone, literally alone. Now, those people existed somewhere, but it was like spread out. It wasn't like the everyday teenager could find, you know, people in their school who would go out and protest with them. I was however many, 10, 15 years too late for that. And I guess apparently the 20, 25 years too early. And now when you see 1,000 kids come out, And then they're doing stuff in between. And I know because they're calling me and they're showing me and they're sending videos of the stuff they're doing in their school, the stuff they're doing at home on their streets. If you think about that as a trajectory, we have great things ahead of us. And I wouldn't discount that this is a moment, but I think it is the trajectory of those many moments that is bringing me hope. When you look at it generationally, and if my daughter, who's 25, if her children or grandchildren are seeing as much of an increase in the power and passion and focus as I am seeing, as I'm looking at, the new generation coming out of high school, there's no telling what a wonderful world those kids could create.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Hopeful.
Yes.
So, well, I want to thank you, Nika and Adrian, for joining in on this conversation. I want to say to the people out there, if they haven't seen the film, that they watch the trailer and be sure to see the film. So again, thanks for joining us tonight, and I don't know, we'll see you on the streets, I guess.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.